the big macro shift is the shift from growth at all costs into, whatever you want to call it, sustainable growth.
My guest on this episode is Chris Walker. You know Chris from LinkedIn, where he's been pushing the boundaries of B2B marketing for years now.
Because I work with so many companies at once, I'm able to see the patterns and the problems and what people are trying and whether it's working or not.
Today, he's CEO at Paceto, and he's my guest on the podcast finally. After a few years of being away, I finally got Chris back on the pod. We talk about the future of go-to-market, his thoughts on the role of CMO and what's changed versus 5 years ago, why sustainable growth is the only way forward, what role AI will play in B2B marketing, and I even got to ask him some personal questions about his own workflow and how he finds time to write, think, and create. Here's my conversation with Chris Walker.
1, 2, 3, 4. Exit.
Chris, something you said, I don't know if it's all this stuff is, I don't know if it's LinkedIn. I've been listening to your podcast. I'm trying to stay sharp. You push me to stay sharp. You said, tell me what you mean by this. You said, some people think I'm wrong, but I'm really just early.
Great way to start. It feels like I've been that way almost my whole career, especially as I've gotten more from the outside. I was just telling you before we got on, because I work with so many companies at once, I'm able to see the patterns and the problems and what people are trying and whether it's working or not and what technology they're buying and all these different patterns across 50 companies or 30 companies at a time. I now have access to all their data and their finance and their CRM. And so I'm seeing perspectives across the executive team. And so I'm able to pinpoint those things years, maybe 3-5 years before someone inside might actually see it. I think, and a lot of people, sort of come at me for these ideas. It's been, I don't know, people call me a contrarian. I really don't see it that way. I feel like I'm just reflecting the truth that people don't want to hear. But I've been early around my whole career on some of the things, and I'm just communicating the things that I'm seeing. Some smart people like you see the same things, hear the same things in communities, see those patterns. And there's a small percentage of people that are like, yeah, this guy's right. Like I maybe I don't see it right now, but I believe him. So that's how I think about being
I want to ask you something more about like the feedback loop. I think you and I are uniquely exposed to this feedback loop, which does create an advantage and allows you to be early, but saving that for later. Just this is more of a personal thing. And I think what's interesting to is obviously people will know you from our, there's a lot of overlap. This will be a very popular podcast episode. It's like feeding raw meat to, this like just throw this by a cage, right? Like it's going to be nuts. But with that, I think part of having a strong point of view comes with a lot of people who don't know you, don't like you, and you get comments on social media. And I'm just curious because there's a few other folks that are in this situation. I want to ask you this personally. Like, how do you not let that stuff get in your head? I see people trying to dunk on you all the time. Even when you're not trying to dunk on someone thinks that you're trying to dunk on them. What's your evolution with social media been? I see you every now and then you can't help yourself. You do have to say something in the in the comments. But I'm just curious, like what your perspective has been. Like as someone like, hey, I have a strong point of view. I'm going to share my way. With that comes a bunch of people who either interpret the thing, don't like what you say, interpret things the wrong way. Like where does that sit in your mental space as I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to build a business, I'm trying to take care of my personal health my mental health at the same time. There's a lot of dunking that happens. Where does that sit in your headspace?
To me, it's become more of an understanding and an acceptance. Like I understand why people think that way. They don't have the perspective that I don't have. They haven't seen the data that I have. They haven't had the 50 CMOs tell them the truth under NDA. They haven't seen the finance data of what's happening at the company and how CAC is going up or whatever's happening in the finance data. They don't have the same perspective that I have. And so it's more of just an understanding at this point that other people, don't have it. And then like for me, I've come to the point where I'm not making the stuff up. This is not my opinion. It's literally just like, there's enough data to support this as a fact. You could write a clinical trial around some of the things that I say with all the data that's available. And then people have their own invested interests in the world being in a different way, right? Maybe they sell, something that I've, have enough data to say doesn't work anymore, right? And so I can understand that perspective as well.
I have noticed there is a common theme that is the people that are often the most antagonistic or don't like the things you say the most. They're often solo consultants for some reason. Have you noticed that trend?
Yeah, and it's like why? But because conversely, 5 years ago, Refund Labs, like there are many people that come up to me on the street. It happened to me in Tulum last week. Some guy was like, 5 years ago, I was a solopreneur. Now I have a 35 person agency, and all I did was just follow the same stuff that you were doing. And I'm like, that makes me happy, dude. Like, and so why are these people pushing back? I'm like giving you a clear opportunity to make your business more successful. And
Well,
then, yeah, some people will do it directly. Some people will do it in post and it'll show up in my algorithm. And I've developed a very clear policy. I've only done it 5 times, but there's a difference between having a debate, having a, intellectual or respectful debate versus being disrespectful. And when people get disrespectful, it's just immediate block at this point. I just don't have time for that bullshit anymore.
I agree. It's not healthy. There's also this weird thing. I was listening to this podcast today, but with this doctor, this woman, she's amazing, and she's talking about parenting. I'm dealing with something with one of my kids right now, and I'm trying to get better. Like anything, I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to be a better parent. Like, how do I help my daughter through this? We're driving each other nuts right now. And she was like, there's no room for nuance in the world that we live in today. And I think that is what's funny about marketing is like there's marketing as a craft, as a business discipline. There is so much nuance in marketing. And then like you throw marketing point of view and takes and advice on social media, and there's no room for nuance on social media. And so it just becomes this crazy thing. And I think it's also another example of like, if you listen to what you say long form, like I got back into listening to your podcast recently because I knew you were going to be on. I kind of just cleanse myself. Other than doing this podcast, I'm like, I got to just like listen and not marketing stuff sometimes.
Yep.
And so I learned through, who I interview. And so I listen to your podcast. I'm like, man, this is really good. And I think if a lot of people if you listen to the hour-long thing that Chris said about X, that would change your opinion versus if you just read the headline and the soundbite. You got to hear the tone of voice. You got to hear the nuance. You got to hear the backup. And so it's like sometimes I think the short form stuff actually does a disservice to the actual, like if you took the time to listen to the whole thing, you would have a different perspective.
Yeah, and then to back what you were saying, like I'm starting to feel like it's time to like rethink the box of marketing. Like I think that there's a bunch of stuff thrown in one category that is poorly defined, and there's too many responsibilities, long-term, short-term, tactical, strategic, product, pipeline, all under one thing. I just think it's creating a lot of confusion.
That's later in my notes. Producer Dave, save it. All right, so we got through that. Another thing I want to ask you about is the ROI. Talk about the ROI of having a podcast and being active on social media right off the bat. And I want to lead you in a little bit because I heard you talk about this recently, and you talked about how it's given you such an advantage, whether it's a podcast or a live event, not to create pipeline or sales. Obviously, that is a nice benefit if you can generate sales from your podcast or social media or content. But and this is so key, it's given you the ability to figure out a business's strategy and shorten the feedback loop instead of having to like spend 6 weeks coming up with a survey, trying to send out a survey, getting 500 responses. Can you just talk about that from as a marketing strategy for people listening to this, the value of the feedback loop and how you talk so passionately about like the strategic insights you get from this feedback loop?
In 2014, I worked with a consultant named Andy Midland. I was a like product manager at a $10 million industrial company, and he came in and he taught me a lot more about marketing than just running ads. There's this whole other thing, which is like, what product are we going to build? How are we going to price it? How are we going to competitive position it? How are we going to understand what people need? How are we going to test that? How are we going to beta, alpha, launch, revise, new features, roadmap, and there's like all this other underlying stuff. And so I remember going to trade shows and building like a survey and like spending more time not trying to sell the product, but to understand what do people want? What are we missing? How do we change the messaging? What on the brochure needs to be different? At that point, the only time you had to do it was the 5 times that you went to a trade show. And so much has evolved in the way that you're able to access your customer and that you don't need to build a booth and for people to show up. Now you can host your own event. You can have your own community. You can have your own Zoom calls with prospects and things like that. And so, and I didn't think about this initially, but the way that I've seen it now is that like the value of the podcast is, like, as you mentioned, just not about the pipeline that's created. Like the benefits that I'm seeing most right now is like all the objections that come up when people ask questions, like the roadblocks that people say like, hey, I want to implement this, but this is the roadblock I'm running into. The feedback and the insights you get from your customers help you shape your message, your product, how you help customers implement, how you structure your organization, how you price it. And so there's just so many benefits around those aspects that I find super valuable.
This is like, I often think about, I use this example a lot. I'm like, I used to be obsessed with like old school advertising, direct response, like Bill Burnbaum,
Same.
David Ogilvy, that type of stuff, like the creative that was, it made like there's like ridiculous ads, like your doctor's favorite cigarette was like the Lucky Strike, ridiculous. But I like understanding some of those principles. And I would often, when I talk about this topic, I often think about, man, do you know what, that generation of marketers, they would kill to have the insights that we can get from like writing a post on social media and getting instant feedback. And I think this is something that can be true at any scale. Obviously, for both of us, we have lots of followers on LinkedIn. You have an email list. I have a community. There's a substantial audience there. But I think you can do this in smaller doses. And what you have, I used to think social media used to be like an afterthought as a marketing channel on a team.
Still
Now,
is kind of.
it
Yeah.
still is, which is crazy. Look at anything in the world. Social media is how the world communicates. And that is true whether you sell hoodies or, enterprise software.
Politics, like they're like
Right.
the most powerful things in the world happen through social media. Yeah.
And I think it's not always a direct response thing. It's not like, hey, I posted a link to my thing and, people sign up for my product demo. It's like the ability to test messaging. And so we did this in the early days of when I was at Drift. We used the CEOs like LinkedIn. We used social media from the founders. We got a lot of that way. But now I'm doing this in a different way with Exit 5. It's like the same thing we were doing 7-8 years ago. I'll give you an example to build on something you said there. We did our first event this year. I wanted to not pay a lot for speakers. I wanted to not hire famous people to speak at the event. I wanted to put on an awesome event. And so literally I went to our podcast analytics and I sorted by most downloads over the last year. And I went through, I picked the top 10 episodes and I reached out to each of those speakers and I said, hey, Chris, you were one of the most popular speakers on our podcast last year. We're doing an event in Vermont. It's in September. Would you want to speak? 9 out of 10 said yes, because they already know us. They already have the relationship. And the content of the event was amazing because I already felt like I tested it, right? And it's like, if you can have these little feedback loops in all of the parts of your business. So that's more context for you maybe to get your idea back there. But I wanted to ask you, like, how would you, okay, so give me that. And then
just the side benefit that I've noticed most recently that I think people really underappreciate is that I've actually found like my podcast content to be most effective for GR and NRR, retention and expansion. And that like when your customers are listening to your message and then like, you got the CMO and they're like sharing it now with the CRO. And then all of a sudden you have an expansion potential and more people in the organization are bought into the theory and the message. And all of a sudden they're staying for longer and buying more stuff and happier and telling more of their customers and their friends about it. Like that benefit is just not very trackable. Like people just tell my customers are like, hey, I was listening to that episode of the podcast. I shared it with my counterpart. It's been like amazing. They feel so much more aligned now. It overcame that roadblock. I think that people underappreciate all of these side benefits aside from pipeline creation.
Well, there's just something about the format of like, structured but casual audio. Like I've been listening to Tim Ferriss for 10 years. I feel like I know the guy, right? I'm sure you have people in your audience the same way. They've been listening to Chris Walker for 7 years on his podcast. They feel like they know you, and that creates a connection at the same time. And you can become a source of information for them. So how can we help other people? Like, I think it's easy for somebody to be like, oh yeah, well, you guys have huge followings. Like you can post something on LinkedIn and get 1 million comments, or you can send your email list. Like, how do we make this possible for other people? Maybe you don't have a huge audience, or you're at like an unknown enterprise software company. Is that a false belief that you can't tap into the benefits in the same way? How would you help somebody do that?
Everybody starts at zero. We both did.
What was your zero? When was that?
I mean, like I had 900 followers that I had collected from 2008, whenever LinkedIn started, to 2019. I had 900 followers when I started, like actively posting on LinkedIn and giving it a real shot. Our first live event that I did had 17 people there. I did my first in-person event, 10 people came. I had like a whole thing set up in Miami. We rented a space, 10 people showed up. Hopefully that's like encouraging to people and the benefits that I felt are relative to the scale that you're at. Like at that point,
Absolutely.
I had nobody knew me. I had like 3 or 4 customers. I had 2 people on my team. We had no money in the bank. And just going there and getting 1 more customer, that's 25% growth. You know what I mean? Like it's all relative to your size and scale.
Yeah. Or having to test only 17 people showed up to that live event, but like they stuck around, they stayed. Having to test your pitch and test what you're talking about with those people, that's 17 more people than you got feedback and data from before. Right?
And how do you expect hundreds or thousands of people to follow you and listen to you if 17 people won't, if 1 person won't, right? So
also I've seen you do this, but for me, something that's like awesome about, we've tried to like consciously evolve the Exit 5. Once we started building Exit 5 as a real company, they're not like Dave's hot marketing takes anymore. It's like I'm basically like, I think I'm a good host. I love interviewing. I'm a good party host. So I have CMOs and other people on my, at my party. And then we're like a curation business instead of a creation business. Like we share their takes, right? However, when I'm hosting, I notice if I say something, I made an analogy, like I use an analogy. I'm sure you do this at the same time. You use an analogy, even if it's only 17 people, the chat lights up because of a joke that you said or something that landed. It's like truly like a stand-up comedian going to some like rinky-dink venue to test out their things. And you're like, now I'm doing it right now. I make a note and I follow up with that later. And then that becomes like a fleshed out perspective. And so I think there's also some value in you having to stand up and turn the mic on and just go for an hour.
It's a creative outlet to me. Like it forces you to be there and be creative and try new things. Like that happened on my event like 4 years ago. The MQL hamster wheel came out there and it was like our leading message. People would say it all the time. It was the number one thing they started sales conversations with. It came from just like a random joke on a live event.
Love it. Love it. Okay. If I were to start an agency, it would be a B2B social media agency, because I think people don't know how to do it and don't know how to think about it the right way. And it's still this is the value of it. You also get pipeline from it. That is like a nice also benefit, is that people are going to buy when they show up in your self-reported attribution. But we could talk for hours about this. All right. Next topic. All right. So speaking of, some people think I'm wrong, but I'm really just early. 5 years is a lot of time, especially in this industry. You've said, 5 years changes a lot. I give different advice now than I did 5 years ago, and that's a good thing. Let's talk about what's different. 2025. What has changed? How do you summarize the things you're talking about right now as it relates to what's different? And our audience is B2B marketers. They want to be, they're current marketing leaders or future marketing leaders. So that's your lens.
The big macro shift is the shift from growth at all costs into, whatever you want to call it, sustainable growth. I don't really calling it profitable, efficient growth, because many companies can also burn and be efficient. But that shift, right? And so the first 3 years that I was talking about it, like you could have silos of marketing and SDRs and sales and partner and divide the credit and in a simplistic 4 funnel model and not have any finance data coming in and just dump a couple more million and raise 18 months later. And didn't really matter if we got 30 customers or 20, or if our CAC payback was 3 years or 2 years, we just keep going. And then there was a big shift that happened in 2022, 2023, where the revenue multiples of software companies have fundamentally shifted, which requires us to be able to be a lot more efficient in how we think about our overall go-to-market strategy and how we integrate and combine the functions of marketing and SDRs and sales together to make one machine that delivers customers in a very efficient and sustainable and scalable way. So I think that's one big thing that the market still hasn't adjusted to. Finance is demanding that we cut costs, right? So they're cost cutting, but they're not getting more efficient. More efficient means making every dollar work a lot harder. When you spend $1, instead of getting, $1 back, we need to get $4 back, right? And then if we do that, then we spend the same amount of money and we get 4 times as many customers. I'm like, that's great for everybody, including shareholders, even the people that have 10,000 stock options.
So is this related to like post? I'm a brand man. I like to tweet and write on LinkedIn. I'm not a CAC metric SERP, This is your hair. This is your hair. But is this like this is post, so like the bubble, there was kind of 2020, 2021. Is it post is it 2021 to now when this happened? Like the flooding VC market, growth at all costs, like is that what changed?
What fundamentally changed is how investors, public investors, value software companies. That used to be a lot higher and now it's a lot lower, and that compresses down into the private market, and it changes how much you can spend to acquire a customer, because that means it forces how much you're burning cash and how frequently you need to raise. And then at some point, like people get to the end and the founders don't even make any money, right? That happens at a lot of VC funded companies. So I think that's one major
shift. Could you imagine, by the way, as someone who started multiple businesses now, could you imagine going through all that blood, sweat, and tears and not making $1 on
And you don't take any distributions either. You know what I mean? That VCs don't allow you to take, maybe you take secondary, but you don't get a distribution every quarter like you do in a company like ours. And then all of a sudden you sell your company for $50 million and you have $100 million in preferred returns and you literally make nothing. So that's one big thing. Another thing that I've been obsessed with recently is just like the evolution and the speed of AI. I think that people are.
Right.
It's almost like the first version, like almost when like the internet happened. People take the physical world and they just try and copy it into this new world with the internet. So people are doing that with AI right now. Like, how do we take our SDR human and make it an AI SDR? And I think that's the first fundamental layer. But over time, I think people will appreciate all of the additional capabilities that get created through this technology.
All
So
right. I got to
I'm
update my
excited
notes.
about that.
We're gonna come back to that. I'm updating mine.
Love it.
I'm literally live noting. I also sent a screenshot of us to Eric at Hatch, and he just head exploded. So okay, let's talk about. We're gonna talk about AI, but on this growth, so the shift in growth at all costs. Okay, so it changed how investors value companies, yada yada. I heard you talking about how marketing measures the effectiveness of marketing. And so maybe I'm translating, I don't know if I'm translating this right or wrong, but you've talked about basically like how it impacts how we calculate things like CAC as an example. So like you spend $100,000 on a campaign, you make 300 grand back, and everyone's like, woo! But you're like kind of raising this flag and you're like, hold on. If you actually go and unpack the actual costs inside of the company, what is the marketing headcount? What is the sales headcount? What are all of the expenses? Is there something in there where it's almost like you're saying like we want to measure, we need to get back to measuring these things like a lemonade stand, like truly like I bought the lemons, I got the table, I got the jar. Like is there a topic here that you've been getting at?
100%. Like if you're at the lemonade stand and your lemonade is $1 and the sugar costs 50 cents and the cup is 30 cents and the stand that costs this much money, and all of a sudden you get $1 for the lemonade, but it costs you $4 to make it. Like you're sitting at the lemonade stand losing money and for your time. And that's what happens in B2B SaaS companies right now. And so there's one best practice, and it's an easy example because a lot of people do it, where they take the Google Ads Manager, and the Google Ads Manager says, wow, we have a 3x ROAS on our Google Ads. So we spent, $1 million on ads, and we have $3 million from some attribution model to say that we got $3 million in revenue from that. And they're like, yay. And then, but you didn't include all the other advertising. So now it's down to a 1.5 ROAS, and then the head count, and then the agencies, and then the consultants, and then the SDRs, and the sales team, and then all the technology, and then the leadership and the sales enablement team and RevOps. And it's like, what? Now all of a sudden we have a 5-year CAC payback and marketing celebrating in the corner. And so,
Yeah.
And so
how does that get fixed? Like it's like the wrong way of, it's like everything is measured. It's just not a true statement of like where the money is going across the company. How do we fix that?
The guardrails placed on the investments that happen through marketing, like marketing is the one who's responsible right now for saying whether their investments are working or not, and for creating what the benchmarks are. Finance should be delivering a lot more strict and stringent guardrails around, we spend this money, this is how we measure it, this is the allowable range that we're in, which would flag most of the investments as unacceptable at the moment. But because finance doesn't have a true understanding of go-to-market, they're not able to properly scrutinize them. Another big shift that happened, it's been going on for years, and a lot of people are pumped about like marketing mix modeling and multi-touch attribution and things like that. Back in the day when it was single touch attribution, every dollar in revenue or every dollar that you spent could only get credited to $1 in revenue. And now with multi-touch attribution, you can take $7 that you spend and can give all $7 credit for the same dollar in revenue. And so it's very unclear about what is actually working or not. Maybe I can see you a little bit confused. Maybe I didn't explain that properly.
Yeah, dude, I'm like a brand marketer. I make the t-shirts and the pens. So let's explain the $1 and the $7 thing.
Single touch attribution. You get $1 in revenue, and you would have to say that was the Google ad, or that was the LinkedIn, or that was this thing, right?
Okay.
Or the SDR. You had to make a choice, right? So you had no double counting. And now all of a sudden with multi-touch, you get the $1 in revenue, and then each individual person, the event did it. Oh, the Google ad did it. The LinkedIn ad did it. The SDR did it. This person did it. This technology did it. And all of a sudden you have all these tools with their individual reports all taking credit for the same dollar. And all of a sudden it costs 7 times as much to get a customer.
The classic example of like someone, in B2B has an amazing time at your event, then go to Google, search for your company, end up, getting the ad or the organic search query gets credit for that, when it's actually a way to, there's some percentage of all those things.
Yeah,
so
I feel the need to clarify always. Like I'm not against multi-touch attribution, just the way that it's used in companies is totally flawed.
Yeah, it's all right, dude. No one's going to listen to that nuance in detail. They're just going to roast you for that.
They'll probably just skip by it.
And so, we got to this point because it was like kind of growth all costs, and it didn't really matter like what the true CAC was, or like what the, you know, cogs inside of a company are? Like how did we get here specifically?
All that mattered was the blended CAC, right?
Okay.
So like finance is up there saying, okay, we have a 3-year CAC payback or whatever. It's all good. And then they just start dividing. And then we raised another round and it was easy. And we did it at 100x revenue, and we'll just divide more and we'll just spend more. And so the revenue leadership has never been forced to take a hard look at each dollar and say, what are the things that work hard and what are the things that suck? It was just put more on each thing. And so it's no fault to a CMO or a CRO. A CRO is easier because they have PRP targets and things like that. But for marketing leader, they've never been challenged to look at this in this way.
What is PRP? Is that like TR?
Yeah, it's like TRT. Per rep productivity, like how much revenue a rep brings in. And so people haven't been challenged around, how do we decide, like, if we can't just spend $1 million on everything, and we have to be very strategic around, we only have this much money and this many things, we can't do everything. How do we decide which things to do? I think most people struggle with that concept because they've never been forced to. At least CMOs that have been in SaaS for the past 10 years haven't been asked to by the board or the executive team, for the most part.
And so ideally, this would be fine. Like finance has strong guardrail. Like finance gives the marketing team strong guardrails, and then the marketing team executes within those guardrails.
I think it would be really beneficial to manager and director level people to say, this is my target, right? Like, and usually they're like 4 or 5 times above the target, and it's going to force them to be creative and innovative and try new things and do things. And I think that a lot of people would appreciate that. And maybe they do have targets, they're just not measured or thought through in the right way. Yeah. So that's sort of what we're trying to do at Paceto, which some people think, oh, I'm over here trying to shit on marketing. I'm actually trying to empower marketing, because when you do this and you deliver the right ROI on all of your investments, it becomes super easy to do the podcast, to do organic social media, right? Because it costs not a lot of money and it drives a ton of result.
I was going to ask you about that actually, but you said something now like, so you can do things that are creative and innovative. And I'm over here on my own podcast, and I've gotten reviews of this podcast before. Someone's like, I can't believe this guy was a CMO somewhere. He doesn't know anything. I'm like, well, you know what I'm good at, Chris? I'm good at brand. I'm good at product marketing. I'm good at positioning. I'm really good at creativity and innovation and, you know, getting people's attention. Isn't that what you want out of marketing? Like we've gone so far in the other way. It's like, wait, no, the best situation. Do you want me being the finance? Like, do you want me spending do you want the CMO? Do you want the head of your marketing organization to spend all their time figuring out like the blend of spend across, you know, what is the head count of this and what is this? No, you want me coming up with good ideas to help grow the business and move us forward. And so the reality is, if I could have a partner like this in my company or externally, that's going to allow me to fly. You want me to be in that position. It's like you want your engineers to actually write code, not spend all days in meetings talking about justifying the expense. And so I think it's actually like a 1 + 1 = 3 type of scenario. Like, let me be creative. Let me be this. Let me be the M in the CMO instead of like half of my job is spent in finance, which that's not where you want me. You want to put me in a position where I can win.
Yeah. And just like the way that it's structured right now, like prevents creativity, prevents doing new things. Like it actually forces you to just do these small little things, Google ads, performance marketing, events that you're able to measure that people can't actually justify the ROI, but they've accepted in their mind that we're a cybersecurity company. We should go to 15 events. We should spend $250K on that's what cybersecurity companies do in marketing. And so it's like,
right. And all this stuff is even more important now than ever because of what you talked about, because of AI commoditizing, like AI is basically commoditizing shitty marketing, right? And so I actually think of it as an advantage. It's like all the things that are just like table stakes, that's just going to get done by AI. And so that allows like the actual creative and strategic marketers to be able to think of, how do we win? AI is kind of like leveling the playing field for everybody else. And so how are we going to go and win in this space?
And I just think that the difference between like looking at analytics and structuring your RevOps and like processing the finance data and figuring out what the ROI is just such a different responsibility and skill set than, you know, managing the Magic Quadrant at Gartner and developing the podcast and doing the product marketing and influencing the product roadmap and doing all the customer research and building the copy for your website. It's just incredibly different responsibilities and skill sets that we just put into one thing and say, okay, this is marketing. I think the same problem's happening in RevOps, to be honest. I think that there's certain functions that just have too many competing objectives and talents and skill sets that it almost becomes fundamentally impossible for one person to manage.
I was going to ask you about this. So talk about the marketing thing, because I think we had thought about the team when I was at Drift like this. David, the CEO, was like, there's clearly two pods. I think at the time we had split them up into like brand and demand.
Mm-hmm.
You wrote something the other day that I saw, which is like there's kind of two movements in marketing, and correct me on what you actually called it, but it was like there's kind of one bucket that's like product marketing, content, thought leadership, brand building, and then the other one is more of like the traditional demand gen. What do you see? What would be like the ideal way to split up marketing in that world?
Yeah. I really don't think that we should call it brand and demand. I think it's very confusing for people. The terms are poorly defined and people have their own thoughts. So I've come up with my own. There's a part that is strategy. There's a big part of marketing that is strategy, which is analyst relations, PR, comms, product positioning, competitive intelligence, customer research, the shit that if you get it right can 5x the growth rate, right? You're not going to get that from advertising. You're not going to get that for certain things. It's like if we shift the positioning and launch this new feature and like are able to message differently in this competitive situation, like our win rates could double. Like there's massive value in that type of stuff that actually has benefits across the entire customer lifecycle. It's not just about pipeline creation. It helps you win more deals and increase win rate, the speed and the velocity, the renewal rates, the expansion rates. And so we can't just measure that part on pipeline creation. And the skill set and the timeline in which you think in that is a much longer term timeline. I think thought leadership belongs in there too. I think that using a podcast as a way to get insights can belong in there as well.
All right, that's good. I'm down. I'll lose brand and demand. So strategy and what's the other bucket called?
And like a great CMO, that's what they bring huge value to the business in. Like
Absolutely.
your 50 million ARR, that's where you really do a lot of stuff. And then you have,
I mean, this is what I've spent 90% of my working relationship with the CEO talking about is those things. Like all we did was we had a WhatsApp and we talked basically 24 hours a day about like positioning, this play, that play, showing up at this event and not doing the trade show thing, like those things. We never talked about the individual like ad unit. So that's strategy. What would you call the other bucket?
And then you have pipeline creation, which I've broken into 3 different stages. You have demand creation. We need to get our target accounts to be interested in wanting to buy our stuff. Then you have supply chain. How do we supply our prospecting engine with high intent, high quality, qualified people and accounts that were ready for prospecting? And then the prospecting engine, which a lot of times falls into sales, which I think is a poor thing. We want to be able to have all 3 of those things, which pipeline ends when our sales team has a qualified meeting, not when our SDR books a meeting before they do BANT. And so bringing those functions together, and then marketing ops needs to extend all the way through. Like marketing ops usually ends at they filled out a demo request. It needs to go all the way through to our sales team has a qualified opportunity in pipe that we're going to win greater than 25%. And so like looking at it that way, that right now that split responsibility between marketing and SDRs just allows you to play the blame game. And so 30% of companies is my estimate that have compressed those functions together, SDRs and marketing. And that becomes advertising. It's interesting to think that, you have SDRs and prospecting in there, the optimization of your website. Yeah. A lot of events could be driven for pipeline or it could be driven for strategy. So like it's interesting to think whether like events should be spread out across the whole customer life cycle and multiple people can have events. Why do all the event budget go into marketing just because they administer the event? I think we should be challenging that. Ops and data and analytics and process optimization and alignment between the functions, all those things should fall into pipeline gen. And that's a lot more math, quant. It's more like science, right? And then the strategy becomes more like art. And I think that breaking those 2 things into different functions allows you to measure them differently and allows you to say, okay, these things over here, we're going to think about them this way. Like we should be doing AR not just for pipeline creation, but also on retention. When we made that new investment, did our NRR go up? And think more strategically across the whole customer lifecycle. And then when you have the other side on pipeline gen, it's just very clear. Like we're running a Google ad. What is the goal? It's to get somebody into a meeting with our sales team. We spent this much money. Did we get the meeting? Did it convert? Did it work? Like the ROI on that side becomes a lot more cut and dry too. And when we put it into marketing, it becomes hard.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good way. I do like that because I also think you want to have collaboration between those 2 teams, right? You want to have great product marketing, clear differentiation. A strong strategy is only going to improve the conversion of those channels anyway. And so they got to be able to work together. Where I've seen it just becomes siloed and like you have demand gen, which is just like okay, all of marketing. Like at 3 companies that I've been at, the demand gen person, the demand gen leader has always been the most stressed out person at the company because we just put everything in that bucket and they got to do everything and they own the entire revenue number. And then, product marketing and content, we just get to dance around and like, hey, let me know if you need anything.
Yeah, I mean, the best time when I was running pipeline gen for a medical device company, it was the most amazing thing ever. Like most of the marketing in quotes team was product marketing, clinical data, customer research. We had new features coming out, new clinical data coming out, new announcements, new positioning, and new PR news releases, and all that stuff was just all podcast interviews was just all the fodder for our advertising. Like, okay, give me that new feature came out. Let me tell our whole customer base about it, right? Like, and so you have like the creation, and then you have the distribution side of it.
It's funny, we've it's been 2 years of doing Exit 5 and everything's been organic. And this year we're trying to grow more. We have bigger goals. Imagine this, we started spending on advertising. Guess what's working really well now? Advertising, because we have an amazing brand and organic base and we know which content is going to work. And like those two things work really well together.
I know people are so in the either or game, and like at the beginning maybe, but when you're at whatever 5 million, somewhere in that range, it becomes a both game.
Okay, so that's good. That's helpful context. I hope people will hear you past that. I don't think if you listen to that, I don't think anybody would say that you're dunking on CMOs. I don't know a CMO out there who wouldn't want to have more alignment from the rest of the company from a finance side, have a clearer team structure to win. Anything else in the like what's changed in the GTM side of things that's relevant for this audience? Or like current beliefs and opinions you have about where GTM is going?
I think one that is blindly obvious to me, but I think people argue about, we need a lot smaller marketing teams at most, especially more developed companies. Like,
I saw this in your predictions. So smaller internal W2 fixed cost marketing teams.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of my customers have a 50 to 100 person marketing team. And then I have some customers that have a 4-person marketing team, and the 4-person marketing team somehow puts out 100 times better stuff 100 times faster. And it's because they're not sitting in meetings debating, like, why do we need 4 teams and 5 approval levels to send 1 email? And when you have big teams and responsibilities, it's like...
That's been the most fun part about having this business, Exit 5. We're a content and media company, and we have 5 people. And the level of things that we're able to put out, because I think we know what we're doing and there's no nonsense, like because there's nobody like arguing with the VP of sales about like, nurture and MQLs and this. Like I say it all the time, like we're putting out work at the level of a 50 to 100 person marketing team because they're smaller. And then this is the AI. This is where the AI piece gets really interesting. Is like it's not about writing shitty content. It's about like, I think as somebody I've always thought of myself as a full stack marketer, meaning like I never want to wait for somebody else. Like I got the idea. I'm going to go into HubSpot. I can get the landing page done myself. Like what's possible now? It's nuts. I don't know if you're like a big Claude user or anything, but like,
and Versal. Yeah.
Dude, I can make a landing. I could literally go make a landing page myself, right? Or at least make a mock-up. So I can have the idea, I can have the copy, I can have the landing page, I can then hand that off to somebody. So what's possible with like shrinking the cycles? Like I've been at companies where it's like, yeah, what's up with that thing? It's stuck with the creative team for 3 weeks. And so there is a lot of bloat in marketing. And I don't think the AI stuff is about like writing, shitty blog post copy. It's like giving me a superpower as a marketer where I can now do the job. I can now do 4 or 5 things that I don't need a developer. I don't need a designer. That's what's possible. That's what's really exciting. So smaller internal teams. Okay.
It makes the speed much faster, but if you're in customer insights, your competitive intelligence, your strategy suck, then no amount of volume that's created through AI or speed is going to make anything better. And so just really like AI is an accelerant, just like many things. Advertising is an accelerant. Like it's an accelerant to something that's already working, that you've already thought through a great strategy. So that's just a point that I want to make. When you do have smaller headcount, it allows you to be a lot more flexible, right? Like think about e-com, right? Like there's big buying seasons like Black Friday and Christmas, and then there's very low buying seasons for certain products. And the factory that they have is able to flex up and down. It can make 1 million things for Black Friday, and then it can make 100,000 later. And because they're able to buy less materials and things like that, like there's no flexibility when you have so much fixed cost headcount. And so lower headcount cost creates more flexibility. Oh, demand is down in Q2. Let's lower our advertising, right? Like we can just cut it down. We can keep our CAC down. We know people aren't buying. We're going to change our strategy for that period of time. Most people are just like, oh, we just run $100,000 a month every single month, no matter what it is.
It gets hard because it's like that's someone's job, that's someone's team. And so like, what are they going to do and how are they going to feel valued at work if we don't have things for them to do? It's a crazy cycle. Are there common, oh man, people are going to get mad. Are there common, so of the bloat that you see, are there common like pockets of bloat? Are there any patterns among the companies where there are, parts of the marketing org that are overinvested that you would probably not need today?
I mean, the places where I see companies reducing is probably a good way to look at it. Are partner SDRs, sadly, like content organic, and then all the program dollars that go to like basically all program dollars are just all tides, all boats sink and rise the boats, or whatever the saying is. So like events and advertising and programs are just coming down naturally because they need a lower CAC. But those are the things that I'm seeing companies cut. And then, if you like have a smaller team, then all of a sudden you have 80% of your budget to spend on programs instead of 40%, right? And that gives you double the amount of things that you can do that are creative. You can hire an expert like Dave to come in and give you a great strategy or something like that, like where you don't have that budget because it's all tied up in W-2 headcount right now. There's a couple other ones that I had that I think companies will just be a lot smarter around bringing external experts in. Like it's just like in development right now, product development, that is in software engineering. It's not about how fast or how much volume you do anymore. It's about, do you build the right thing? And and the right thing, typically someone from the outside might be able to help you narrow in on what the right thing is a lot better. And maybe that'd be a better investment of $5,000 than having someone, the fifth person that's going to do your organic social channel.
You mentioned the strategy piece, but as a good one, I talked to a CMO recently and she was like, yeah, one of the most valuable, things is I have this person who's amazing at positioning and messaging, and I've basically hired her at every company, and she comes in for 3 to 6 months, and it's not a full-time role.
Mm-hmm.
And, to have 50, 100, 200 grand in the budget to be able to do that and not have to like sacrifice anything else because the team is smaller. I think that makes a lot of sense. I have your list of trends. So smaller internal W-2 fixed cost marketing teams, senior leaders getting back into execution. I think that's a result of having a smaller marketing team. You can't really just, if you have a smaller team, can't really just be in meetings all day, I guess, right?
And just like I feel like you need to be doing it to properly direct your team. You need to be on the event to hear what the customer says, to see in the chat, to know that message worked. And I've been this myself. Like in 2022, I was this myself as a CEO. I got so separated from our customer that it's hard to drive the strategy of your team or your company.
Follow up on the CMOs that don't CMOs. So one of your thing that this is a thing that should happen, but probably won't. CMOs need to own the prospecting machine. Mm-hmm. Is this also like, do you include like SDR in here too, which is like in your ideal world, would they own BDR? Because those terms can mean different things, but BDR is like prospecting. SDR is like actually following up on leads and booking the meeting. Would the marketing org own all the way to like getting a meeting booked and setting a meeting?
I mean, I wouldn't call it marketing anymore, but yes, in this org, the pipeline creation org would be all those things together. And it makes it way easier to understand what is the efficiency of all these investments blended, and then how do we break it down more simply. And the split between BDR and SDR is simply whether you're using a third-party data source like ZoomInfo versus a first-party data source like your marketing automation, your website, an event. And so it's just, to me, those semantics are dumb, for lack of a better way to say it. But yes, like at 100 million ARR, the thing that will hold back a CMO that's responsible for pipeline creation as one of their core KPIs is the prospecting machine. Whether you call it BDRs or SDRs, you use AI to do it, or you have like super high deals and your AEs do it, it doesn't matter. To actually hit your pipeline KPI, typically you need a qualified account that's talked to an AE. And so there's this layer between they fill out a form on your website to when they get there that you need to understand and have control over and influence and be able to move the investments and change how it's allocated and drive the strategy and create more cross-functional alignment. And I watch a lot of companies, specifically in the $100 to $500 million range, that have pipeline problems. And it's basically the split of that function where SDRs fall under sales because they want to have a training ground for AEs, which, by the way, usually doesn't work anyway. That split becomes the reason they don't hit their pipeline target.
Good job. You earned your appearance fee on this podcast.
I'll get a gold star. You could send it.
Yeah, I'll send you a gold star. I'll use Eric, our intermediary, to send you a gold star from me signed. This is more of a personal question, but I want to end on this because I think it is also about marketing and about leadership. How do you find time to think, right? You've created a lot of really strong and insightful opinions. You have, ideas on strategy. For those of us out here that want to be future marketing leaders, future entrepreneurs, future CEOs, like, do you intentionally, are you reading all the time? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you going on long walks? Are you going to Tulum and taking mushrooms? I don't know what, whatever it is, but how do you find the time? Because I even feel like myself, I need to stay sharp, but I also need time to like write and think and to formulate opinions. And when I get sucked into like, I spend my whole week on calls, reading emails in Slack, listening to podcasts, information. I'm like, I didn't take any time to like step away and put pen to paper and think and write out my philosophy. And so whether you're an entrepreneur or you're somebody listening to this podcast that's trying to think about the marketing strategy for their company, how does Chris Walker do it?
Yeah, when I discovered it was probably 2021, 2022, there's a theory between the manager schedule and the maker schedule. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, where managers just want to stack in 30-minute increments. How many meetings can I have, and how much can I get done from a productivity standpoint? That's how they get stuff done. And then you need the makers, the creators, where if you have a meeting at 9 and then another meeting at 12, you don't get enough open flow to be able to actually create anything. And then you're thinking about the next meeting, what you need to do to prepare and things like that. So I've shifted my schedule quite a bit, where Wednesdays and Fridays are totally open. I take no meetings or calls during that time. If I want to call someone and brainstorm and do that, I usually do it through an audio call, but that's my choice to do it. I'm not obligated to have any type of meetings.
This is how far we've come. He has to say audio call.
Yeah. And then I stack all my internal meetings on Monday. I do all my podcast recording on Tuesday. I do most of my sales calls on Thursday, and then I spread out the rest of the sales calls throughout the Monday and Tuesday afternoon. And then I have 2 open days. So that's like one thing that's been really working for me.
Yeah, that's important because it's the context switching. It's like jumping from this
Exactly.
to then like now I need to go in deep work and like be in thought mode is very hard.
Basically impossible, at least for me. Take at least a 4 day vacation. I leave my space and I go somewhere else, not to do work or to do sometimes I do writing and thinking. I usually sometimes I go by myself, sometimes I go with my sister last time I did this. But then usually, and it happened to me, I just got back yesterday from Tulum. It's funny that you mentioned that. A minute that I get back, it's not even like the next day. The minute I get back to my space, I have all of these amazing ideas flowing out of me. It's like I get 100 days in productivity in a couple of hours. Like I solve a problem that I've been like confused or lacking clarity for months in 5 minutes. So now I intentionally I consider it an investment at this point, right? I used to think about it's an expense, right? This vacation is going to cost $5,000. It cost me money, but then I get $1 million in business value when I get back from it. So I see it as an investment now. And I think doing that at whatever frequency is, financially feasible and right for you. To me, I found that 6 weeks is the right amount. So those have been 2 sort of tricks. And then I think the podcast recording, I do that for 3 hours a week. And I find that to be a very creative outlet. And I get most of the value because I re-listen to the podcast. I find it like watching film as an athlete, like re-listening to my thoughts saying, oh, I could have explained that better. Or, oh, there's like something right there that really hit. I can feel that. Or I would use this word differently. Or like, this is how we should position this part of the product or whatever comes up. I find that to be a really interesting way for thinking as well. Especially when you do it on a podcast like this or live. Like I can't right now say, hey, time out, Dave. Like time out. Let me like write some things down and think about what I want to say. It becomes very organic. It's like, so I find those 3 things have been really helpful for my thinking.
Oh, that's great, man. I love the idea of listening back. I think it feels uncomfortable, but I find myself, I'm like, because you just kind of just zone out and you're just talking.
You almost like,
really
especially
good.
when I do my own talks and it's like 20 or 30 minutes uninterrupted and unprompted, like, yeah, you almost do just like black out and talk. And some people don't do it, so they don't understand it. But like, I'm not consciously remembering the things that I said.
Right. But you're trying to, it is the creative exercise. It's like free, if it's like, if you could rap, but you're freestyling, it's just coming out of you. And then you're listening back and you're like, that was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then you cement it. And now you kind of have these takes, right? Like I'm sure that, we're talking about your trends for B2B marketing. It's not like you didn't sit down to go write on LinkedIn and think, what do I think about? You didn't just like on the spot come up with like smaller internal W2 fixed cost marketing teams that has come up over and over and over. And then you're able to label it, name it, and it becomes an idea. I also think just the schedule stuff, let's remember that marketing should be a creative job. And and there needs to be some of that in there for those of you who are marketers that listen.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it doesn't matter what the size, but like many of them, I find a pattern around 100 million ARR. There's many creative CMOs that don't get to do marketing anymore, don't get to be creative, literally sit in meetings all day and have to deal with, politics and fires and someone's not happy with some other person in the department, and that sounds like prison to me, kind of. And I think that I've watched CMOs from that position move to a Series A company with 3 people and get to be creative again and reinvigorate their love for the practice and the profession.
All right, Chris, great job, man. Great catching up with you. We'll do more of this. Eric, our guy Eric at Hat. So DM me if you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. He says that Chris and I should start a joint podcast together and just make the best show out there. I don't know if I'm ready emotionally and physically to commit to that, but if enough of you DM me about it, we could possibly float it up the chain. Chris Walker, always good to see you. I'm going to take you up on that. We will be seen rucking together at some point in 2025, 2026.
And
so
definitely going to be in Vermont. I haven't been there in a while. You're right by Burlington, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can't wait.
As a member of our community told me on the way up here, he posted on LinkedIn, said, I'm off to the B2B marketing mecca of the United States, Burlington, Vermont.
Yeah. And then I know when I post this, I'm going to get 500 DMs that say, you and Dave have to do a live event. You have to do this live. So maybe that'll be, it's a way to get started without committing to the whole podcast.
Absolutely.
So maybe that'll be a good one.
Yeah, we just flirt a little bit and see where it goes, right? So Chris, good to see you, my friend.
Thanks, Dave. Always
later.
good to see you, man. See ya.